Tonight, Ronald Reagan on the offensive.
I've never felt more optimistic.
The defensive.
My brother said that.
And facing a new battle with Congress.
Reagan raises taxes in his budget. He just doesn't call it that.
A rare look inside Afghanistan under Soviet occupation. Also, the possible relation between stress and breast cancer. And Paramount Pictures presents Sex Education for You and the Kids.
What's the connection between sex and love? There is none.
From the Independent News, this is USA Tonight with Morton Dean.
Good evening. Morton Dean has the night off. I'm Brad Holbrook. Whether the president was able to rise above the controversy surrounding the Iran-Contra Scandal, today he was acting as if he had. A day after that much-awaited Tower Report speech, the president was seizing on the revitalized arms talks as a ticket out of the very recent past, with hopes of landing in the history books a master of foreign policy. John Aubuchon has more.
One thing that has made our republic great is that we don't hide from our mistakes.
Ronald Reagan is back in the saddle again.
Ronald Reagan and his friends thought last night's speech worked.
I think he was damaged some, but I think he's overcoming it fast.
So the president tried to recapture control of the Washington agenda to get the headlines off the Iran affair and onto arms control.
I've never felt more optimistic about the prospects for success in this area than I do today. And that's because this past week, we've had a major breakthrough on the path toward an agreement for mutual and verifiable reductions in arms between ourselves and the Soviet Union.
The breakthrough was Soviet leader Gorbachev's agreement to negotiate a treaty on medium-range nuclear missiles without a halt in the president's Star Wars program. And just this week, the U.S. put proposed treaty language on the negotiating table in Geneva. The American negotiating team will be back for a meeting with President Reagan tomorrow, giving the issue an even higher profile. But the president keeps tripping over embarrassing reminders of the Iran scandal. The latest, his brother Neil Reagan told a California newspaper this week that the president remembers what he wants to remember, and that probably the Iran weapons money was funneled to the Contras when Congress cut off aid because the president decided there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Mr. President, your brother Neil says he thinks you knew about the diversion of funds to the Contras. Have you had a chat with him?
My brother said that?
Yes, sir. He said you think there's more than one way to skin a cat.
I'll skin him.
Late today, the president made another foreign policy move, meeting congressional conditions for the release of the final $40 million in aid to the Contras this year. That will set the stage for a new political fight on the issue, a test of presidential strength.
Most observers believe the attention to arms control is more than just a diversion. There seems to be a chance for progress, coming at a very fortunate time for Mr. Reagan. But the Iran questions will keep coming too. No one doubts that his speech last night helped him. The questions are how much and for how long. John Aubuchon at the White House.
Before returning home, the U.S. arms negotiators stopped in Brussels today. They briefed NATO allies there on the plan to eliminate medium-range nuclear missiles in Europe. NATO is said to favor that idea, but the allies are concerned about the Soviet Union's short-range weapons, weapons NATO doesn't have, and the United States wants to match or eliminate. Lawrence Walsh, the independent counsel looking into the Iran-Contra affair, got a new job today, but his task remains the same. Walsh will now head a newly created White House office of independent counsel. Attorney General Edwin Meese making that announcement, calling it an insurance policy to head off a legal challenge that threatened to derail the Walsh probe.
By my authority as Attorney General, I am appointing Judge Walsh to head a new Office of Independent Counsel. And second, the department is today filing in the district court a motion to dismiss the suit challenging the independent counsel.
The suit was filed by Oliver North, who's under investigation by Mr. Walsh. North contends that Walsh was appointed by a court which has no authority to do so. The administration hopes that Walsh's new title will put an end to those questions about his authority. Coming up next, another battlefront for President Reagan, and in focus tonight, a rare, detailed look at the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan.
Brought to you by Taster's Choice.
A three-way battle is shaping up tonight in Washington, a battle over raising your taxes. Many congressional Republicans say no increase is needed, and President Reagan has vowed not to ask for one. But leading Democrats are saying the president will have to eat his words. Barry Cunningham has the story.
The call for a tax increase was a political disaster for Democratic presidential candidate Walter Mondale in 1984. A disaster that President Reagan has exploited ever since, ridiculing the Democrats as the party of tax and tax, spend and spend.
Sometimes the big spenders in Congress talk as if all that money they spend just kind of magically appears on their doorstep, a gift from the Internal Revenue Service.
It is a measure of Democratic muscle in the new Congress that House Speaker Jim Wright of Texas has made a tax increase his #1 budget priority, and key Democrats are supporting him.
Quite frankly, the president doesn't want to make a hero out of Walter Mondale. He knows for sure now that Mondale's correct. You got to pay your bills as you go along, and Ronald Reagan just can't bring himself to admit that he might have been wrong about that.
Ultimately, Reagan raises taxes in his budget. He just doesn't call it that. We're going to have to confront this issue, and I think, I know that the Speaker wanted people to start thinking about it, and he's basically getting the pot boiling, and he's doing some of the stirring.
Republican senators who met with the president today said he's still opposed to any tax hike. Instead, he'll stick to the Graham-Rudman target to cut the deficit by $40 billion. House Republicans agreed, no tax hike.
You can see that Speaker Wright is leading back into that old thing of spend and spend, tax and tax.
But pollster Jeffrey Garin says the Graham-Rudman target is politically impossible. Nevertheless, new taxes are a risky proposition for the Democrats.
And they recognize that. They're not doing it for political benefit. But there's a sense that the country is on the verge of an economic crisis because of these unrelieved, unrelenting deficits that have been piled up year after year after year.
Either way, a compromise on a tax increase is seen here as a key test of the president's ability to cooperate with Congress in the wake of the Iran arms scandal. At the U.S. Capitol, this is Barry Cunningham.
For 7 years now, guerrilla warfare has torn apart Afghanistan as Afghan rebels fiercely battle the Soviet troops who've been occupying their country. For the first time in 3 years, a British camera crew has been allowed inside Afghanistan for a graphic look at that war-ravaged nation. In tonight's In Focus report, Nick Gowing tells us that anti-Soviet rebels have been somewhat successful in striking back at the Moscow war machine.
This is what Mr. Gorbachev calls the Soviet Union's bleeding wound, exactly a year after he announced Moscow's intention to withdraw from Afghanistan. Fighter aircraft and helicopter gunships shot down by Mujahideen missiles, now retrieved by Soviet army lorries for scrap. Evidence of mounting Mujahideen success against Soviet forces. Soviet security in the air no longer guaranteed. You can never escape the sights and sounds of war in Afghanistan, even though officially there is meant to be a ceasefire. On the ground, enormous Soviet barracks and hardware dominate, here at Kabul airport. In the air, Soviet and Afghan military aircraft pump out flares against the threat of heat-seeking Mujahideen missiles. In Kabul this week, the Afghan leader, Dr. Najib, told me that Afghanistan had now presented to the United Nations-sponsored talks in Geneva what he called a new concrete time frame for Soviet withdrawal, although he refused to break the confidentiality of the talks to give precise details. Moscow fears its military withdrawal will create open season for a terrible bloodbath of revenge against tens of thousands of Afghans who've loyally performed the Kremlin's wishes here. Within minutes of leaving the relative safety of the Kabul security zone, we confronted the ravages of the little-seen rural war in Afghanistan. Downed power and phone cables, a virtual wasteland of apparently empty villages and neglected peasant fields. As we entered the town of Pagman itself, 7,000 feet up in the mountains, we heard but could not see shelling somewhere in the vicinity. Pagman is a ruined shadow of its once glorious past. Many people have left for the relative security of Kabul. 90% of shops are closed. Most businesses and peasant smallholdings have been destroyed. And without a thriving economy of its own, life in Pagman is very difficult.
And although peace talks are in progress, there reportedly has been no agreement on a timetable for withdrawal of Soviet troops. Up next on the Health Beat, is daily stress at all responsible for the increasing rates of breast cancer? And still ahead tonight, Paramount Productions comes into the living room with a new sex education video.
You know what else?
What?
Sex is never a test of love.
Never.
Never.
Where is Terry Waite? The fate of the Anglican Church envoy was the focus of an unusual meeting today between Britain's ambassador to Lebanon and the Lebanese Prime Minister. Waite slipped out of the Beirut hotel room you see here 44 days ago. He never returned. He was on a mission to help win the release of hostages being held in Lebanon. The hotel owners say they're preserving the room just as he left it, optimistic that he will return soon. Despite numerous and conflicting reports, Waite remains another missing man in Lebanon.
USA Tonight's Health Beat is brought to you by Advil.
With incidents of breast cancer increasing, doctors are exploring the possibility that the pressures of modern-day life are related to the rising statistics. Karen Hasby has details in tonight's Health Beat report.
At some time in her life, 1 in every 10 American women will hear a doctor say, "You have breast cancer." Most doctors say they don't know the cause of that terrifying statistic, but one theory is that stress may play a role.
Individuals who have lost a spouse, who are frustrated, who have feelings of helplessness and hopelessness, etc., those classes of individuals have much higher cancer rates than those that do not.
Dr. Paul Roche is among those who believe that stress suppresses our immune system, our body's ability to fight off infection, and that reduced immunity makes us more vulnerable to all types of cancer, breast cancer included. Dr. Roche also says that women's new social roles may be partly responsible for the rising breast cancer rate. He theorizes that as more women combine careers and family, they face new and increased stresses, especially women at the bottom of the corporate ladder. Under his theory, women with more powerful jobs are actually less likely to get sick.
Women who are in control of their activities, women who are in their own businesses, who have a great sense of pride of accomplishment, etc., I think thrive on the stress of their work.
Roche emphasizes that is only a theory, and there are many experts on breast cancer who disagree.
We've gotten a new concept about breast cancer in terms of its tremendously long incubation period, so that the tremendously long time period before the breast cancer becomes clinically apparent makes it hard to factor stress in.
So if stress does not cause breast cancer, what does? The doctors agree, only that there is no simple answer.
It's a disease that arises from a variety of different factors, and they can be genetic in some instances, very clearly. They can be environmental, hormonal possibly, and maybe a combination of events that has to take place.
One other point on which the doctors are unanimous, women should be doing breast self-exams every month and should undergo mammography as soon as their doctor recommends it.
It's an old saw, but early detection is really the one way that people can help themselves that's clearly effective.
In New York, I'm Karen Hasby.
It's being called a horrible irony. A child who was cured of a rare immune disease has developed AIDS from the treatment that saved his life. The 2.5-year-old boy was born with a fatal disease and had to have a bone marrow transplant when he was 6 months old. But afterward, the child was given transfusions of blood contaminated with the AIDS virus. Doctors in Los Angeles say the blood wasn't tested for AIDS because it was used before AIDS screening tests were mandatory.
USA Tonight's Health Beat was brought to you by Advil.
USA Tonight, brought to you by the General Foods Corporation and by Vicks Formula 44D.
The message isn't new. It tells teenagers to say no to sex. But what is new is the way the message is being sent. As Andrea Kaiser reports, one Hollywood company is betting teenagers and their parents will pay to hear what schools and even close families won't talk about.
You know what? If I found out that I was pregnant, I would be so scared scared, and I would feel so alone. I would need you.
13-year-old Riley Fish has never discussed sex with her parents before. But after watching this new video that deals with the sensitive subject, the family got to talking.
You say to each other, I love you? To say I love you sounds so mature and so like you're getting into something that you shouldn't get into.
And how will I know if I'm really in love? I didn't know how I would.
Love is caring.
I love the
How Can I Tell If I'm Really in Love is Paramount's latest home video release.
Why do guys take cold showers?
Oh, come on, you don't know that?
Shh, no, really. I mean, why not hot showers?
If he takes a cold shower, he'll become cold. If he takes a warm shower, he becomes warm, not necessarily less or more sexually aroused.
While the tape contains a lot of uncensored language and frank talk about sex, the producer says the message of this 50-minute video is hold off. What's the hurry?
What's the connection between sex and love? There is none.
You know what else?
What?
Sex is never a test of love.
Never.
Never.
The only thing that videos of this sort can do is provide a framework for thought. It can raise issues and let people think about it, and that's all we attempt to do. There are no right or wrongs in this tape.
HTT, and my fantasy is to be ITV of my LTD.
And she said, okay, Joe, you gotta take it slow. Paramount is hoping this video will succeed in getting that message across because it uses humor, attractive stars, and real school kids to do the talking.
You would if you loved me.
You have such beautiful eyes.
Baby, you're driving me wild.
Your place or mine?
You at your place, me at mine.
And he asked me if I'd ever had a one-night stand. And I said no. And cheeky devil, he turns to me and says, well, don't you think it's about time you had one?
The majority of students in Los Angeles County won't be viewing the teen sex video anytime soon. That's because the LA School Board hasn't approved it for health classes. School officials we spoke with say they like the tape's message, but the subject matter is just too controversial. Planned Parenthood, which endorsed the video, believes teenagers, even those in junior high, could learn something from the tape.
Our biggest problem, I would say, is that so many, about 90%, will be sexually active for almost a year before they'll come into a clinic. Where this kind of approach is undertaken, in other words, where information is made available, you're talking about it, teenagers do delay sexual activity up to a year or more.
The Paramount picture is more of the same thing that we've seen for 30 years. It hasn't worked, and it's brought about a lot of sexual experimentation and a lot of the illusion that there is such a thing as safe sex.
Of the 10 most important things in a relationship, sex is number 9.
Well, at least it's in the top 10.
I would say number 1 is trust and care.
At least this one family has given the tape a thumbs up because they say it broke the ice about a subject they were all afraid to talk about. This is Andrea Kaiser in Los Angeles.
And that is USA Tonight. I'm Brad Holbrook. Thanks. Good night.